I'm going to start out by saying that I don't know much about the guest worker program. Like most Americans, I don't believe that these are the world's best and brightest workers in the world. Instead, I think these are imported third world workers to displace American workers in the American workforce in order to add to the corporate world's bottom line. But I am sure the answer to the guest worker program can be found in something that I do know about, and that is the undocumented immigrant worker. Before I talk about the undocumented immigrant worker and the huge double standard that makes it preferable to hire an immigrant rather than an American here in the American workforce, I'd like to lay out some of the history of what our government has done to protect us Americans from these problems. And let's see if anything of it has worked. In 1963, there was only about 1 million undocumented workers in the country. By the time Ronald Reagan was president and offered a one-time only amnesty, there was 3.5 million. Of that 3.5 million, 1.5 million met the qualifications for the amnesty, and they took it. The other 2 million, rather than returning home, they stayed here. The Immigration and Naturalization Service attempted to round them all up and deport them. The Department of Justice was successfully sued because they were racial profiling and violating their Fourth Amendment rights. That didn't work, so somebody on Capitol Hill got the bright idea: if we send American jobs to the third world, then they won't have to come here. So we ship tens of millions of jobs in textiles, assembly, and manufacturing, first to Latin America and then around the world. Gave them tax breaks to do so and other incentives. Well, I can guarantee you what the other incentives were. When they got to the third world, they didn't take American-sized paychecks with them. They took a living wage, but it was far less than what Americans were making. For instance, in 1996, if you was a Mexican and you went to work at a factory that was owned by Americans making products to be sold here in America, you could make a whopping $120 to $150 for the week. This wasn't bad money for living in Mexico because it put you basically in middle-class standards. The work week was only 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday, and only 10 and a half hours a day. The undocumented immigrant workers, though, they realized they could earn double that money if they continued on with their trek and came here to America. Today, there's over 10.5 million undocumented workers in the country. The Border Patrol, who's been around all that time, has not been successful in stopping this human tide that keeps coming across the border. Next came NAFTA, which basically gave them even more rights to cross the border as drivers, and they were able to use their Mexican licenses to drive. Then, because government is such a fine and benevolent people, they gave them rise to go ahead and have contractors' licenses. Now, this doesn't make any sense to me, because quite honestly, if it's illegal for them to work in this country, how in the heck can they have a contractor's license? It's simple. It's all about the money. Government wanted its share of the money. Well, wait a minute. That means government's buying into the fact that the Latino community has been stricken with affluenza. And even affluenza will buy you some corrupt politicians. And then after that, because there's so many of them, we went a little bit further and we gave them tax ID numbers. And the reason we gave them tax ID numbers is so that income taxes could be taken out for the federal and the state government. And as long as the government was getting their fair share of the money, they were happy. Now, if they don't get deported, the Hispanics that file their tax, that pay taxes, can file for their taxes and get a return. But I have a question for you. What about those other deductions, the deductions that an American would make if they were working on the job? What about deductions to Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment? Are those being made? I don't think so. So we the people, things that take care of us, they were left by the wayside. Government was just thinking for itself. And by doing so, government actually showed that it supports the idea of this double standard for people working in America. Now, this is where the states are going to get involved. The federal government and states' governments all have plenty of laws about labor. But who enforces those laws? Does Homeland Security or the NSA do it? We know the FBI and the CIA don't. Who at the state level does it? In my entire 50 years of being around it, I have heard of less than 50 busts. That's one bust per year of people hiring undocumented workers. And what happens to these folks? They get a fine, and then it's back to business as usual. No one has ever stopped the flow of money by simply going and dunning the people that are doing the hiring. Governor Snyder of Michigan has recently said they don't take anybody's jobs. They create jobs. They have their own economy. And in my very next segment, I'm going to show exactly where that economy comes from and how much it actually does cost to hire an undocumented immigrant worker. But the federal government nor the states have actually protected us citizens against these problems. They've had the opportunity to do it ever since day one, and they've never done it. All they had to do was enforce labor law. When I come back, we'll talk about the undocumented worker.